Thank you everyone for tuning in and welcome to CTO Talk. I am your host, Matt Ferrari. On this 30-minute program today, we get to discuss all of the challenges, the issues, the opportunities that are really impacting those of you who are in healthcare tech. You get to follow the show on Twitter at #CTO Talk or follow me at MP Ferrari. With me, really excited today to have John Bloom, the development manager at ClearDATA, and Jason Johndrow, senior software engineer at ClearDATA. Jason and John are here today to really talk to us about some of the kind of innovative things that they're doing and seeing in the world of Microsoft Azure. And so many of you out there on the healthcare IT side are probably dabbling in, if not already using Azure for protected health information. And so I figured, hey, it might be some good time to bring in some experts to talk about what they're up to. So welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
So, I'd love, to start just kind of level set where you guys are at and what you guys do. John, would you mind kind of describing for the audience, what a day in the life of John is?
Sure. As you said, my name is John Bloom. I live in Lawrence, Kansas, and I work at ClearDATA, and most of my time is spent looking at Azure and thinking about it from a compliance standpoint, looking at new services or existing services and seeing where we can build tooling or guidance for healthcare companies on those services, and then building relationships with Microsoft so that we can understand where they're going and how we can even further, maybe in the future, think about the different tools that they're producing and how those too will fit under the compliance frameworks that we support.
That's very helpful. As I think about many folks in the audience, as you adopt Azure services, I'm sure you're always thinking about what is the new business associate agreement coverage, or when Microsoft is releasing new cognitive services or new ML, ultimately, how can healthcare organizations benefit from those? And I want to make sure we dive into that today. And that's a lot of what John continuously looks into on behalf of ClearDATA. Jason, how about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Jason Johndrow. I am a senior software engineer here at ClearDATA, and my day consists of a lot of figuring out how things work inside of Azure and how to automate them. I spend a lot of time analyzing different services inside of Azure to see exactly, what we would do to make this HIPAA compliant or healthcare compliant, and how we can automate those processes, and not just automate them in, as a one-time thing, but, to provide a compliance over time by, how do we continually check on these services, and, what are the remediations that we will follow, in case something goes out of compliance. So I've spent a lot of time in development and in the operations side throughout my 20-year career. And with both of those, I always try to keep in mind that, that there's also support staff. And there are IT workers that are, working in the trenches that are leveraging these to help, secure their environment and make their organization safe. And, thinking about how, from the, not just, writing a piece of software, but how, the actual operations that are running every day inside of an organization, how those can use our services and leverage them, and it be, a tool in their toolbox instead of another thing that they that they just have to tend to. So that's my focus is the customer, and on how we keep them safe in the cloud, and how we protect these resources.
Jason and I's roles actually complement each other pretty well, because I tend to stay at a pretty high level, and so I'll come to him with a service and say, okay, here's some of the things we need to accomplish on this service, and he's actually there hitting the API endpoints and digging into the actual record of evidences that we're going to have to look at.
That's great and extremely helpful for this discussion. So, Jason, why don't we start with you then? Both of you are talking to customers and probably some of the listeners out there constantly. Just starting kind of with database, it's always on the mind of a lot of the folks that I talk to around, database transformation. And as you think about Microsoft, one of the struggles specifically with providers or EMR organizations has been kind of the evolution of kind of that traditional Microsoft SQL Enterprise database structure they've been buying for 20 or 30 years, but there's just so many more services with Azure that, are out there that have really strong compliance regulation play. So would you mind just kind of walking through what you're hearing from folks in the market regarding kind of Azure database adoption?
Yeah, sure. So I'll probably start with it that, a lot of these organizations, have lots of basically databases and data, stored inside of their organization behind their walls, inside of data centers that may be 10, 15 years old. Oftentimes these are not, over time, with personnel move and everything like that, they start to age, and it gets harder to keep these cloud, internal networks compliant, right? And a lot of people want to move also to the cloud, with these, but they want to do it in a secure way. So they see all of their infrastructure, there, and they feel that secure, but also sometimes they feel like it, there's something, something missing. There's something that they don't know. When you start to look at moving it up to the cloud, there's good ways of moving it up there, and there's now great ways to actually protect those assets. And what really makes it compelling is once you get up there, you can isolate your databases inside of enclosed areas that they're not talking to everything in your data center. They're not exposed to everything in your data center. They have network security groups around them and everything like that. You can tie them into VNets, you can tie them into endpoints to where, only certain things can talk to them. But beyond that, you get the deep, rich threat protection that's available inside of the cloud. So when we enable them, we make sure that we put on some safeguards for transparent data encryption. It comes like that by default, but you can turn that off. So we have remediations in place for that. And advanced threat protection. So advanced threat protection will, monitor what's happening to your database and give you notifications if it sees anything unusual. And then another layer deeper, we add in vulnerability scanning. So another feature of the threat protection that you can enable is vulnerability scanning. So you can set this up. So it'll actually analyze your database and tell you things from a SQL Server level that maybe you didn't know. That you should, that it's best practice to disable this or to set this up in a certain way. So by moving to the cloud and by leveraging, what is there, you can have a more robust overall operational security, presence. Another thing that happens is the services in Azure are also well tied together. So the threat protection information and all of that data that's coming out of there is shared with your log analytics and with your security center, right? So your security center will raise to the surface any of these red lights or any of these problems that it finds. And then the complement to that is also log analytics, because then you can use a Splunk-like interface to query across large data sets of your logs. So that's kind of stuff that we deal with customers. A lot of times, they have large data and they maybe want to figure out how they would get that to the cloud. So we help oftentimes with helping them move that information to the cloud. And another facet is that classically a lot of companies have done databases as these just large monolithic things that you just throw more and more power behind it. And now with the advent of some new services inside of the cloud and the ease of managing databases, the ease of using other data storage methodologies and querying capabilities, that you could actually, start to make your databases not so large, right? You can spread that out and you can start moving things around to where it actually kind of operates like an ecosystem of information instead of being this one monolithic store. And I'm sure that any DBA out there could appreciate, when they get presented with restoring a several terabyte database, that what that means. So sometimes you can, by orchestrating your processes right, you can leverage a lot of the cloud services to make that a better, more resilient, and more recoverable type of ecosystem.
Very, very helpful. John, in your experience, I know you've been through some kind of migrations even yourself. What would your advice to a DBA or the audience be on how to get started with, migrating away from kind of this traditional model to some of the tooling that Jason described?
Yeah, one of the things that we noticed when we began looking at compliance and began looking at the different cloud options that you have on Azure. For example, you have Cosmos DB for your document database kind of structures, and then you have, of course, SQL, which is what most enterprise customers would probably be looking for. And some of the things that we notice from a compliance perspective is a lot of the stuff that you are normally have to worry about in a data center, you're getting out of the box. So encryption at rest, for example, is one of those things. And you really easily enabled encryption in transit, and the ability to quickly turn on logging and auditing are other examples that might have been very difficult within a data center, but are pretty simple when you get to the cloud. But as you're thinking about migrating up, there's a couple options. Microsoft has the ability to actually send a physical device to your data center. If you're talking large amounts of data, we've been able in a HIPAA compliant manner to take data from a data center to the Microsoft data centers and get the data in that way. But of course, it's good to work with a partner as you're going across this kind of process, because it can be pretty complicated. It can be something that there's a lot of things to navigate as you go. So just the sheer number of things to keep in mind as this process is going down the path is something that we've been considering.
Speaking of things to keep in mind, before recording this, you reminded me that, some of the things that you're looking at are on the Azure Policy side, and, ClearDATA has a lineage of automating compliance alerting and compliance remediation and these kind of things. How has your view on Azure Policy changed that? And how do you see Azure Policy helping healthcare organizations moving forward?
Yeah, Azure Policy is a great tool. If you think about kind of in a nutshell, it's a controls engine, right? You have these different controls across multiple industries, whether it's financial or healthcare or marketing. Different organizations have these controls and frameworks that they need to control. One of the things that Azure Policy does is it gives you a set of tools out of the box that you can enable, and then you can take those controls and use them to tie them back to the different regulatory frameworks that a healthcare organization might need to look at, say HIPAA or GDPR. And so Azure Policy is just a really powerful tool that Azure has out of the box that you can really get started, but then you can go a step further with custom policies or with remediations, and not only take what's out of the box, but configure it to meet your organizational controls, and then remediate the things that go out of compliance. It'll bring it right back into compliance.
That's great. Jason, I'm sure you have familiarity with the services as well. As in your intro, you mentioned kind of automating and building a lot of this remediation out. As you think about Azure Policy, what is your advice, or what are your thoughts on how healthcare organizations can start to embrace this, as it relates to GxP or HIPAA or whatever regulation they're facing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So basically with Azure Policy Engine, you can basically set up things that will look at services as they're being created, that will make sure things are going in a compliant manner, and then notify you if they're not, or block them altogether. So, if you're setting up like SQL, say for instance a SQL server, and you want to make sure that, you want to validate that, that your threat protection's turned on, and that you're, that you have everything set up to where, TD is enabled, and that you're doing, checking all of the boxes of compliance. You can kind of put those in into a blueprint that basically can go into Azure Policy and, create that service in a secure way. and make sure that if there's anything that's being created outside of that, that it either blocks it or it has some sort of a notification attached to it. That's where I see it being a huge boon. Now, the real nice part is that Azure Policy kind of goes across the entire ecosystem. So when you're writing against it or looking at things from it, then you're actually looking at the, at the raw JSON, like templates, the ARM templates, and it's seeing those and saying, hey, is this the correct settings? And you can set actions off, to remediate or to do other things. So it not only touches, your SQL, it touches your VMs, it touches, any service that you're using in Azure. You can set up things to make sure that the configurations are going in a compliant manner that meets HIPAA regulations.
Excellent, extremely helpful. Jason, as you think about adoption in healthcare, a lot of what I've been reading about with policy and even the briefings I got previously were around not just automating remediation, but also kind of taking policies on the CI/CD pipeline and the DevOps side and kind of building out more of a compliance assessment, pre and post deployment. Have you dabbled in any of that, or do you have customers that have interest in kind of almost automating the end-to-end CI/CD pipeline experience?
Yeah. Actually, one of our earlier customers, I helped them build out their pipeline. And basically, they're set up now to where their DevOps, so they use Azure DevOps to push stuff into Azure, not just their code, but their infrastructure as well. So at that point, once you lay a policy down upon the, upon the tenant or upon the organizational structure inside of Azure, then when they deploy code, it's all coming from, bits, right? So it's infrastructure as code. So they'll tear down something and relaunch it, straight from templates. And then once it arrives in Azure, the policy verifies that is, that was laid down correctly, that it doesn't violate any sort of rules, because you can do, infrastructure as code, but then forget to do something and you have, something hanging out in the wind. Whereas the policy then will take and double check that. So that's what we've done with one of our customers right now.
I believe Azure Policy in the near future is going to support the ability to do that in a test sort of manner. So you can even do it on your right during development. You can code out your infrastructure as code, send it off to the subscription and say, run this against my policies in a test mode or without actually deploying the infrastructure, and validate to the developer that the infrastructure that they're getting ready to release already meets the policies. So that'll be a really powerful.
That's right. Yeah, that's the what if, which is great.
Excellent. Yeah, very, very cool. As you think about adoption of healthcare, we didn't talk about this beforehand, but I'd love to get your perspective on Blueprint. The vast majority of conversations I have with healthcare organizations express interest in, the HIPAA blueprint or, the GDPR blueprint and upcoming blueprints that we all know Microsoft has in the works. John, I know that you actually had experience, contributing to some of the feedback. Would you mind kind of walking through your lessons learned from working with some of the Microsoft blueprints out there? Because I know healthcare organizations look to those first as they adopt Azure.
Yeah, the healthcare blueprint was really important to us at the early stages as we were launching our product, because in a sense it was a chance for us to see where Microsoft was really pushing guidance towards HIPAA adoption of its services. So we relied heavily on the prescriptive guidance of the HIPAA blueprint, and then we were able to take that guidance and develop some of our own continuing safeguards. Blueprints are an amazing tool because they give you sort of an out-of-the-box compliant environment. Because of that, the power of infrastructure as code, you can set it up so that every box is already checked, and as long as that blueprint is being maintained, it really becomes a powerful thing for launching compliant workloads quickly. The struggle we came with was, once you've launched a compliance workload, how do you continue to keep it compliant? And so we use the prescriptive guidance from the blueprint to kind of set the standard of this is what we want going forward. And then we would build automation through tools that we had built similar to policy and safeguards that look introspectively at the services that the blueprint spun up and made sure that those things that were created continuously maintain that compliance state. And so that's kind of the interplay between what you can get from a blueprint, and I'm really excited to see which some of the newer ones that are coming out, because the original HIPAA compliant blueprint was very specific to machine learning and things like that. But there's so many use cases within healthcare organizations that I can see a lot more of these coming out, and then using policy or other tools to continue that compliant state.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in on that. One other thing that they also do, if I toss on my CIO or CFO hat, then they reduce cost as well, which that's always a large piece. Is that how long does that take you to get into production, and how many man hours is that? So with a blueprint, if you have kind of an easy way to deploy that in a compliant state in an easy manner, then it frees up a lot of your IT staff to do more important things than just building putting hardware together.
Sure.
Yeah.
And just as a reminder to our audience, today we have the privilege of talking to John Bloom, the development manager at ClearDATA, and Jason Johndrow, a senior software engineer at ClearDATA, and we're talking about all things Azure. And this is Matt Ferrari of CTO Talk, and really kind of digging in, hopefully to give you out there in the audience an overview of how really can you get started with Azure in a compliant way rather than just use it for dev tests. And there's just so many options now. Jason, coming back to you, you mentioned earlier a little bit about Azure Security Center. Would you mind kind of describing for the audience some of the use cases for Azure Security Center and what you've seen in healthcare?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So Azure Security Center is kind of the central engine that Microsoft uses to funnel all of the information to. So there's an engine running behind it that is checking different things, and there's a lot of things that they check already off the bat. They want to know, is your, VM encrypted? Do you have these things going on? And they'll, raise red lights inside of the dashboard. And that's across all services. So it's kind of one place that you can go look and say, what is my compliance or what is my security, posture inside of the cloud? And how does that look? And then once you layer on policy, what is my compliance standpoint, in the cloud? What does that posture look like? And it kind of ties it all together in a nice dashboard to where you can kind of see, and you're like, oh, that machine's not encrypted, it's red. Or why am I only 75% compliant? And you can dig into those things and find out why. And a lot of that stuff is dictated by policy. In the early days, you didn't have a lot of choices on what you could turn on and off in there. There was a few things. Now policy brings it to the entire cloud of what you could do.
Excellent. We only have a couple minutes left. John, I'd love to hear from you. You get an opportunity to think about and work with Microsoft on lots of upcoming projects. And without breaking any NDAs, as I want to make sure we don't, would you mind kind of sharing with the audience, what are you excited about as you think about, earlier, as you mentioned things in the machine learning space as an example, as you think about newer services from Azure, what are you thinking about that really gets you excited to continue to leverage the platform, and maybe how would it apply best to healthcare?
So there's a couple of things I'm excited about. One of the things that obviously we've covered pretty extensively in this talk is we're talking about policy and the different features. The policy team is putting out features at a pretty rapid rate. You look back at, I think they had some launches in October, then launches in November that were really substantial. So I'm eagerly tracking what they're doing on that team. Recently, I've been really excited what the Azure Kubernetes team has been doing, because as you think about workloads that are more towards a microservice, serverless style architecture, Kubernetes is going to be a big play in that. And we're deeply investigating the way healthcare companies can leverage that on top of Azure. So investigating things like pod-to-pod encryption and things like that. So I'm very excited about what's coming out in Kubernetes, and it seems like Azure's all in on Kubernetes. So I think it's going to be a big piece of Azure's future going forward. With machine learning, there's a lot of untapped opportunity in there, and we need to, as healthcare people, we need to investigate that and go further and further. And we'd like to work with them. We're working with the Microsoft team to see what the next step for ClearDATA is in machine learning.
Yeah, I know ClearDATA has big plans for machine learning moving forward, and you're right. Many folks that we talk to, here that listen to the show are focused on Kubernetes, focused on driving out infrastructure out of their facilities for security or patching reasons, or maybe burstability reasons. Jason, I'd love to, in our final minute here, ask you the exact same question. What excites you about, leveraging Azure moving forward?
Yeah, so definitely Azure Policy. That's a big part of it. They also have some new security stuff coming. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but it's on the horizon. That's kind of exciting. And I'm really excited about the capabilities that you can do with log analytics as well. I like that kind of all of your data can flow back to a central area. And for anybody out there that hasn't had a tool and had to manage an entire data center of logs and various things in various places to go query things, and then all of a sudden had something like Splunk where they could query across their data center and find out different things. That gives you that inside of Azure. And that's exciting to me as well, because it helps you to find that needle in the haystack. When you have 2,000 services out there running, how do you find that one thing? Or how do you query across all of it to bring you anything that's not, that's not right? Or maybe it is right.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for joining today, Jason and John, and to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. If you have a comment about today's episode, check out or follow #CTO Talk on Twitter or me at MP Ferrari. You can always learn more about CTO Talk at HealthcareNOW Radio or at ClearDATA.com. I'm Matt Ferrari, and until we talk again, have a good week.